Hello everybody, welcome to our first Friday Night Magic video. This week we're going to be playing a deck similar to a deck that was on the Against the Odds series on MTG Goldfish. So this is, I believe he called it the Sprout Swarm combo, or Sprout Swarm Engine combo, or something like that. So this is a combo with Paradox Engine and a bunch of druids that tap for mana. So to start off, we have 15 1-drop elves. 12 of them basically just are 1 mana 1/1s that tap for a green. Arbor Elf untaps a forest, so it taps for a green. Then we have 1 copy of Elves of Deep Shadow, which taps for a black, so it's a little bit worse than Elvish Mystic Arbor Elf those. And it also deals damage every time we tap it for a mana to us. So it hurts us a little bit, but we needed another 1-drop mana dork. Additionally, we have 2 copies of Jiraga Tree Speaker, which you pay 1 for a 1/1, and then you can level it up once for 2 mana, and then it taps for 2 mana, and it's a 1/2. So we have 2 copies of this because after we've leveled it up, so like on turn, if we play it turn 1, level up turn 2, and then on turn 3, it's 1 card that does twice the work of an Elvish Mystic. However, we're only playing 2 copies because the fact that we have to level it up, it doesn't gain mana on the turn that we level it up, and so we can't, if we play a turn 1 Tree Speaker, we can't play an Elvish Archdruid on turn 2, which is something that if we can do it helps us out quite a bit. So that's the mana dorks that we have in the list. Additionally, in the 1-drop slot, we have 1 copy of Fog, which should just allow us to basically get 1 extra turn, which I think could be quite important in this deck. The 2-drops, we have a card called Sprout Swarm, which has Convoke and Buyback. So for 2 mana, we make a 1/1 green sap rolling token. However, for 5 mana with Convoke, we make 1/1 and it comes back to our hand. So that's part of the combo in the deck where we get Paradox Engine in play, enough creatures to cast it with Convoke, and Buyback, and then it comes back to our hands and all of our creatures untapped. So we can just make infinite 1/1s that way. In the 3-drop slot, we have 4 copies of Lifecrafter's Bestiary, which lets us scry 1 every upkeep, and then every time we cast a creature spell, we can pay a green to draw a card. And then we have the aforementioned Elvish Archdruid, which is 3 mana for a lord to all of our elves, and it also taps for a green for each elf we control. All of these 1-drop are both elves and druids, which the druid part is important for another Archdruid, the Guiltleaf Archdruid, which says whenever we cast a creature spell, we can draw a card. Additionally, we can tap 7 untapped druid spells to gain control of all lands target player controls. So we can cast a bunch of druids to just kind of cycle through our deck and put a bunch of creatures in play. And then ideally, eventually, we can tap 7 of them, including the Archdruid, who isn't druid, to gain control of maybe all the Tron lands or against like Titan Shift. We can gain control of all of their lands, and that can just bring an opponent to scooping. And then we also have the aforementioned Paradox Engine, which is part of our combo. Additionally, Paradox Engine can just kind of make us play like a Legacy Elves deck, where we have either Bestiary or Guiltleaf Archdruid in play to draw a bunch of cards every time we cast a creature spell. And then Paradox Engine allows us, we aren't playing Nettle Sentinel and Heritage Druid. Nettle Sentinel isn't a druid, and Heritage Druid doesn't tap for mana by itself. So that's why we aren't playing those, but Paradox Engine allows us to kind of make that engine work without having to play those cards. So we can just cycle through a bunch of our deck in 1 turn. Regal Force acts as our 8th card draw engine, and it's not really so much of an engine, it's just a really good card advantage. It provides really good card advantage. So we get to play this on like turn 4 or 5, and we can draw 6, 7, 8, if not more cards off of this single card. So that's our 7-drop. Our 8-drop is a Craterhoof Behemoth, which allows us to both play like a traditional elf deck, so we can play like Mystic on turn 1, Arc Druid on turn 2, and then turn 3 we can spit out a few 1/1s, and possibly even Sprout Swarm, or play a Guiltleaf Arc Druid. But Craterhoof, with only 3 or 4 creatures in play, can actually just win the game if like we have Mystic, or 3 1-drops, an Arc Druid, and then we get a Craterhoof on the next turn, on like turn 4. We can just Craterhoof and attack for a bunch of damage. And then we have 4 X spells, 3 Chord of Callings, which can get Craterhoof, they can get Regal Force, they can get an Arc Druid for a card advantage engine, and then they can also get, or they can get a Guiltleaf Arc Druid for card advantage, and then they can get Elvish Arc Druid if we're on like turn 4, 3 or 4, if we just need more mana. We also have a Genesis Hydra, which kind of acts like a Chord of Calling in the sense that it gets us a card that we need, hopefully. So this one is a little bit more random. We don't get to search our library, we reveal the top X, and it also doesn't have Convoke, so it doesn't work with our Sprout Swarm tokens. However, when we cast this, which is important, it's when you cast, so even if the Genesis Hydra gets countered, we still get to do something else. So when you cast Genesis Hydra, you look at the top X cards, and then you can put a non-land permanent with CMC X or less from among them into play. So we can actually find, unlike with Chord of Calling, we can find Paradox Engine or Bestiary, or just one of our creatures like we could with Chord of Calling, and we can put them into play directly, which also, so we can work around counters. So even in like a matchup with blue-white control, we can land a Paradox Engine through Cryptics and stuff like that. So now to move on to the sideboard, we have a Natural State to work through, ideally to work through Ratchet Bombs and Engineered Explosives. We have a Naturalize to work through those cards as well as get through a Chalice on one, which is a big deal against our deck. We have 2 Rapid Vigors, which allow us to regenerate each creature we control. So that helps us against Supreme Verdicts and the like. We have a Witchbane Orb, which comes in against decks like 8-Rack, Death Shadow, where we have where there will be a lot of like Thoughtseize Inquisition effects. It also comes in against Death Shadow and Burn because it helps us against Lightning Bolts and the like. We have 2 Dragon's Claws and 3 Nylea's Disciples to help against in the Burn matchup. Nylea's Disciple can gain a bunch of life as early as turn 3, and it just scales from there, assuming that all of our stuff doesn't die. And then in control matchups, we have 2 Mistcutter Hydras, which can't be countered. They're additional X spells, so we can pump a bunch of mana into them. They have Pro Blue, which doesn't matter that much, but the haste and the fact that they can't be countered allows us to just kind of kill a control deck out of nowhere. The Vexing Shusher, it can't be countered itself, and if it's on the field, we can pay a green, and then whatever spell we have on the stack can't be countered, so we can blank a Remand, we can blank Cryptics, we can do whatever, we can blink any counter spells that they have with that. And then we have a Witch Stalker, which has hexproof, and every time a player casts a blue or black spell on our turn, we put a counter on it, so a +1/+1 counter on it, so it's a 3/3 for 3, and it'll just get bigger as they try to counter our spells, or as they cast Thought Scours, not Inquisitions, Thought Scours, Ops, cards like that, Fatal Pushes on our turn, that stuff. So that's the deck. I'm hoping that this, unlike the Saffron Olive deck played 4 Chord of Callings, the Genesis Hydra I think could be an upgrade to that because it allows us to find our Paradox Engines and the Bestiaries, and it just gets around counters. Also, the deck played 4 Paradox Engines, and the fact that they're legendary, and even if they weren't, they don't do that much in multiples. Like, you should be winning the game if you have a combination of a bunch of Mana Dorks and a Paradox Engine. Like, you can cycle through most of your deck. So in place of the 4th Paradox Engine, I added in 1 Mana Dork. I'm playing the Elves of Deep Shadow because, honestly, because I didn't have a Boreal Druid. But it shouldn't be that big of a deal. I don't think that we're going to 20 ourselves or anything near that with the Elves of Deep Shadow. And then the Tree Speaker I'm playing in place of, or actually, so I'm playing the Elves of Deep Shadow in place of Paradox Engine, and then the Tree Speakers I'm playing in place of the Boreal Druids that were in the list. Additionally, I'm playing Arbor Elves and not Noble Hierarchs, mainly as a budget concern. Also, they can attack for 1, so they're 1 more power with a Craterhoof Behemoth or something, which shouldn't be too big of a deal, but it can make it a little bit easier to kill the opponent, I guess. And then as far as mana goes, we just have 20 basic forests, so that's super cheap. So let's move on to some games.